everybody. My name's Rodasi. Welcome to Rock Your Mind. And this is about consciousness, this channel, this series that we do. And this is going to be episode 2 of season 2. Today, my special guest is Omkara. And Omkara, I'm just giving one name. It's like, I know it sounds like Prince or something, but that's how I know him. He has another name. He has a full name. Ol, is that how you pronounce it?
Ola.
Ola Omkara Devold. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Yeah, it's close enough. But if
Okay.
if you want to really like pronounce it in Old English, it's Old Devil.
Really? Well, look at you. This is gonna maybe go in a different direction than I thought it was gonna go today. Fantastic. Well, that's great. I'll put that in my back pocket. What I know about Omkara is he is a musician. He's a consciousness teacher and student, and he studied physics also at university, I believe. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And how I know Omkara is through the Bright Path organization that we both have the privilege of teaching for, that we both have studied with for some time. Omkara, when did you first begin your journey with the Ascension practice and the Bright Path organization?
Basically, like most people, I think it was through a friend who kind of recommended it. Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but basically I was kind of sitting on the fence for a while because as you mentioned, I'm a musician, so all my weekends were tied up. And I said, sure, it sounds cool, but I'll wait until I have a free weekend. And at some point that weekend came. I attended the first fair course, like the introductory course. And yeah, that was it, basically. Being as you also mentioned, my education is in theoretical physics. So what sold me with these techniques, if you will, or this teaching was its efficiency, basically. Like I could experience peace very quickly. So that's and from there I basically never looked back in terms of that.
What year was that about?
It wasn't previous millennia sometime. No, I'm kidding. I seem to remember it was around 2000, maybe 98, 99. So been at it for a long time.
I thought it was about the same time as I learned Ascension in 1999 and began my studies and things like that as well. I forgot to mention Omkara is from Oslo, Norway, or lives in Oslo anyway. Yes?
Just outside, yeah.
Okay. So we were going to talk about states of consciousness today, and consciousness period is something that I feel like people don't really get what that is. you know, and I wonder if you could share your experience or what your experience is of what is consciousness.
Well, you kind of put the finger on it, like understanding what consciousness really is tricky. Like they try to nail it down, like it's a huge field of research, right? What is consciousness, and trying out different experiments on people to try and determine what it really is. And it turns out it's tricky. And it gets entangled with time and how we perceive time and all that stuff, right? But in terms of experience, it's way simpler. And in a sense, you can be aware right now that you are aware, right? And in its essence, that's how simple it can be. You are conscious right now that you're conscious. And really saying what it is from there is a bit tricky. It can take multiple forms, but like in terms of, since we're kind of in the spiritual landscape, if you will, we have this, what we usually talk about, we have this like 4 states of consciousness, like waking, sleeping, dreaming, and this 4th state, which is like in our tradition, we call it permanent descendant consciousness, but in other traditions, it's given different names. And kind of when you start digging into that, or start to play with it, you start to meditate, you start to listen, if you will, you start to let go. And basically the best answer I can give, at least what comes now, is that when you let go of everything, like you let go of every idea you have, including the idea of yourself, and including any idea of what's going on, any idea of who you are, what you are, any concept, what remains after you, it's basically just letting it fall away, all those ideas, and you get to experience the purity of what's left. That's the best pointer, if you will, I can give towards what consciousness is. But it doesn't help anyone hearing that you kind of got to experience it. And for people who experience that, and it doesn't need to be my exact words, but when that is shared, or when that is experienced, there's a kind of resonance where you kind of go, yeah, I recognize that. And you see it for people who have been close to spiritual teachers who really, embody that. There is that resonance without any word being spoken. So there is this thing, like consciousness is this thing, which isn't a thing, really. But in order to talk about it, like, it's this thing where you have to kind of experience it, what it is, and you have to let go of any idea in the experiencing. You have to let go of any idea of what you think, what you think your experience is in that moment, because you'll go, that's it. And if you grab hold of that idea, this is consciousness, pure consciousness, like this is unity or freedom or enlightenment or whatever. In that moment, you kind of lost it, right? Because you've grabbed hold, you're holding an idea, and you gotta let absolutely everything go. And that's where it kind of reveals itself. But it has some qualities, right? As I know you know. But for anyone listening to this, like, typically what remains after you've let everything go typically has a flavor of peace, of joy, of love, which seems to be totally unconditional. Like you're not experiencing peace because of something, or love because of something, or joy because of something. Seems to be inherent in the experiencing of that. Again, more than anything, like your question is an invitation to explore more than anything. Yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer to that one, I guess.
Well, it's fantastic though, and my heart's kind of just, there's so much expansion as you share. What I see with a lot of folks is, because we're so habituated, and even we're educated and encouraged and rewarded for thinking our way through everything, for conceptualizing everything, that people, the natural go-to because of that habituation is to try to understand it, like you said. And yet this is, like any good educator has told me, like I have friends who are teachers, educators in the school system, will say experience. We know that experience is where a student is going to really grok or get and deeply understand that concept. It's not going to be just here. It's going to be because we took them into the experience and they got to have it and really learn from that. And yet we have been habituated to get really, really, really masterful at breaking everything down in our head and almost discounting, or if even at all, giving any value to experience. And yet with consciousness, to understand it at all, to understand it like the true gnosis. I've been playing with this word lately, Gnosis, true gnosis, for me is coming into my own experience of something. So I really want people to hear that from you, Omkara, that what you're saying is, here's what it's like, and really it doesn't do you any good unless you go explore it for yourself. Is that right?
That would be correct. Like it may serve to hear it, right? Because it may kind of make you want to do it. But ultimately that doesn't hold like a candle to the experiencing of it. Like, and in some cases it may be a trap, right? Because you think you get it. Okay, I get it. I can put this aside now, thinking you know what it is, but you don't. And I'm speaking from experience here, because this is not like there's no or there doesn't seem to be like final station, like you get somewhere and then ta-da. It would perhaps be nice if there were, but there doesn't seem to be. It seems to be like a continuous basically letting go of anything, and it reveals itself more and more and more. It's almost like and here's where the mathematician in me comes out, right? If you zoom into what's called a Mandelbrot set, you can Google it on YouTube.
Of a what? Say that again.
Mandelbrot set. It's
Okay.
a fractal.
Okay.
And basically it's infinite, right? So you can zoom in and zoom in, and that you can do that forever, like until the universe ends and beyond, and it will never stop. You kind of, that feeling, it's like a journey. You're still, but it's kind of like a journey anyway. And
Wow.
so trying to put it into words is sometimes a bit tricky, but the experiencing of it, it's supremely simple. And here's the really cool thing: it gets simpler. Like there's no like more advanced means more complex. It's actually the other way around. And I use advanced in quotation here. because it seems in some ways it would seem to be that you're actually moving the other way. Like everything becomes more and more simpler. You're moving, you're moving closer and closer to square one all the time. And that's a beautiful thing. Once you're kind of okay with that. And I love, there are two things, right? First off, what I'm saying may imply a timeline. Like, okay, so obviously you started somewhere, and then you kind of advance, you meditate, and you discover stuff, and blah, 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 blah. And that's can be a trap, because it doesn't need to be a timeline. And in the experiencing of it, there is no timeline as such. But it's a useful tool to talk about stuff. And what I love about one of the things in our particular tradition, which is, I believe is common for all true spiritual teachings, is that in any moment, freedom is possible. Like one of the statements that we hear a lot is that no matter how pure or impure you are, no matter how filled with purity or impurity, in the one moment you remember, you're instantly filled with boundless purity, right? So, and that's the foundation of all this we're doing. There's no building up of, in a sense, there's no hierarchy in terms of you build up accumulated knowledge or wisdom or experience. You can, like that can happen. And it does happen like that, actually. It's like you're on this timeline, right? But you have the ability to just step aside and time moves on, but you don't. And that sounds like a contradiction, right? How can you exist out of time? But in the experience of it, it's totally natural. Like there is no contradiction. It's only the problem only starts when you start thinking about it, right? But yeah.
I have a couple of things. I want to talk more about states of consciousness,
Yeah.
but I also want to address you've used the word purity a lot, and I know that might be confusing for some people. It's definitely my experience, and it surely was not at one time. I felt the furthest from pure, because I had conditions placed on what that meant, and it had to do with circumstances in my life. And but the essence of presence, of just pure presence, is absolutely pristine. And so I just wondered if you could talk about, like, that is when you address the qualities of consciousness, of when you are in the experience. And I know that you and I are both exploring that in this moment as we're doing this interview. For some people it might they might think it looks a certain way on the outside, but I know that because of what you and I share, that we're both doing that right now. So it's not like I have to adjust something in order to be in touch with the quality of peace or purity or whatever those qualities are. So I just wonder if you could speak into pure, maybe what that quality of purity is a little bit more, or what you mean by that. I mean, I think of the purity of a baby coming into this lifetime, which we all did. And we're recognizing something. We're recognizing something that never left us. I'm going to leave it to you to go on from there.
Yeah, but I agree. And it's a good thing you mention it, because, like, again, this word purity can conjure up some images of saint-like behavior kind of thing that we inherited from Christianity or something like that, or you need to be a certain way. But simply for me, it's what is left. I'm coming back to this one, but what is left when you let everything go? That's pure, and it doesn't have any. And it's just a word, right? But it's the best. It's one of the best description I can give. Like there's just that in its full purity. It's nothing. It's not two things. It's not this and that. It's just that. And again, when it's experienced, it becomes obvious. When it's thought about, you quickly get into trouble.
For sure.
But yeah, it's a good thing you mention it, because we don't want to leave this, interview and have people think that they need to do anything particular to be like in a pure state. It will come on its own accord as long as you're willing to explore. And for sure, the only thing that may change is your ideas about yourself or your exterior world in terms of what purity really is. So, yeah.
Thank you. How does, as we're talking about states of consciousness, and I know for me, I used to read about a lot. I love reading about this and exploring it, but I enjoy it far more, and I always have enjoyed it actually far more from having my own experience and then reading about it somewhere, like, oh, or having my teacher, our teacher, or someone say, this is what they call this, this is what we're in the middle of experiencing. This is what it's called by this particular book or this particular set of beliefs. Yogic science is super fascinating to me as a result of that, and quantum physics and things. One of the things that you and I've been taught, and maybe you have a different take on this than I do, but that as we grow in life, our awareness just becomes further away from that pure consciousness and more like, it's very fascinating to discover what's going on with the body and the world. And then these thoughts that we begin to have and the emotions moving through the body, and they become a set of like programs and understanding, and all of that becomes just paid more attention to. It's an outer, our attention is outer, even in the body, even in the mind. It's an outer movement as opposed to remembering that experience that we were born into. And so when we talk about states of consciousness, sometimes it can sound like we're talking about a timeline. And at least I used to think of it that way. Okay, now I'm going to go from here, and then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here. And these are the signposts, and this is how I used to read the Yoga Sutras and be like, okay, this is where I think I'm at, and like you said, as soon as you grab onto something in that moment, you're definitely not having that experience anymore. You're now totally connected to a mind and a me that has, some separate agenda. And I wonder if you could talk about states of consciousness more. And we're talking about this in terms of, like you said, in any given moment, this could be the experience, not like we're going on this journey. But I think it's valuable for people, and I shared this with you before we started this interview. I think it's valuable for people to understand that there is a way that the mind and body, physiologically speaking, and where our attention is, which is why I started talking about attention, that there is something more for the average human being. this state of, like we talked about it, this permanent ascendant consciousness. And you know, and you said it's named different things in different places because it's an actual true living reality that people across millennia, across the world have all experienced. So could you break it down or share what you see? I mean, whatever you think is most important for people to know about this being, we call it our birthright, but a possibility for them.
Yeah, like the ordinary, like what's the kind of ordinary, quote unquote, states like wake, sleep, dreaming, like what everyone experiences. They're called like ordinary because, like, if you're not into spirituality, you're not aware of anything else, or that's what you, or what some may believe. I don't believe that. It's just that they maybe haven't got a name for it. And again, as I'm sure, as I know, you know, like Abraham Maslow gave it, like he defined something he called peak experiences. And typically those are the wow moments in your life, or the most beautiful moments you had. And all those moments, if you kind of draw the essence out of those experiences and you compare it across the world, they have like very similar properties, if you will. Usually it's a sense of time disappearing, a sense of self disappearing, a sense of peace, a sense of awe that kind of transcends daily life, if you will. So this experience of there is something more is actually something I'm willing to bet most people around the world have that experience multiple times during a lifetime, right? Even though you're super stressed, or you have been super stressed all your life, there will be moments where it's kind of like, and you may discard it, but it's still there, right? And for I read this book about people who do extreme sports, and it described, in that book, they described how when they do their stunts, like if it's rock climbing or skateboarding and jumping or whatever, there is the same, when they describe it, the same qualities arise, right? There's a sense of me disappearing. And the reason I mention that is because they say that if if they start thinking in those situations, they'll be dead, because the mind is simply not quick enough to deal with whatever, like if you're flying over a ramp or surf wave and stuff like that. So what they're describing, all these situations, and they call it flow, right? You're in the flow kind of when you do these things. And so there's all these hints that there is something else. And I believe the Indian word is turiya, the fourth state, like sleeping, dreaming, and waking, and turiya. And so this seems to be, with a high degree of probability, something that's there for every human being. It's not something for a select few, if you will. It's part and parcel of being human, is that you have the ability to have these experiences. And the commonality seems to be that the idea of a me if it doesn't disappear altogether, it certainly takes a back seat. And there's a sense of life happening for you. You don't have to do anything in order to make stuff happen. You're kind of just flowing through whatever it is. And there's a very cool thing, right? There's this guy who wrote a book called The Art of Learning. He was a chess player and a Tai Chi practitioner, and he rose to excellence in both those fields. But he started teaching people how to reach their maximum potential. And what he said was that when you get to a certain level, like when you learn the basics, basically he spends all his time with his clients on learning stuff. Like, what's in the way of this flow, right? And everything of that is in here. So that's, I think, also why I kind of, when you allow everything to fall away, what is left? It's a question, right? What is left if you allow everything to fall away? And if you do that in every moment, something starts to kind of blossom, if you will, in your life. Not as a lofty spiritual thing, but as a diehard pragmatic thing. Like, your life becomes better. You experience more flow. You experience more what you could call magic. And so I'm kind of all, as you probably guessed, I'm kind of all into demystifying it, because it seems to be built into every human being. It's just a matter of not getting caught in the mind, which is let the mind do what it does, but have your attention on the thing inside you that doesn't move. And when you do that and you play with that, you'll realize that it actually never moved. You've never left this moment. And that's kind of a startling realization. And it's a part of why we you could equate meditation with just simply listen. You don't have to do anything, just listen. What's here now? And you'll realize that in order for sound to be heard, there needs to be silence. And then you can start, okay, let's put a little bit more attention on that silence. And that's where you start from. So I love this thing, like when we teach, we have a talk on states of consciousness, and we kind of, there seems to be this ladder, right, where it kind of get more and more evolved. And as you start to recognize this fourth state of consciousness, it bleeds into all the other states, like waking, sleeping, dreaming. You can start to become aware while sleeping. You can start, like, your body's sleeping, but you're aware. You're dreaming, but you're aware in the dream. And instead of fogging out during waking, you're actually present, aware. And that kind of seems to have a snowball effect. So you start, it's like your nervous system, or one description is that your nervous system starts to open up. So you kind of become more aware, if you will. But the cool thing is that we stopped that talk on something called unity consciousness, which basically, it's in the name that there is no two, there's only one. And again, that's something you kind of need to be willing to experience. That's and I cannot state this, I cannot overstate this, actually. you cannot understand it. You cannot grasp it. The moment you try, you've lost it. But it can be experienced, right? But anyway, that's the starting point. And I love that. That's where you, that's kind of, that's kind of where you start. And, and, and I remember I studied Chinese medicine for some years. And the guy that I studied under, he studied in a Taoist monastery in China. And they had this idea of a natural person. And a natural person would have to be the 7th generation of someone who purified their nervous system doing Qigong, right? And so they would do, and his son would do it, and blah, 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 blah. And then by the 7th generation, you had a chance of being like a natural person. And from what I read about that, that's basically the starting point where everything's, you're just here now. Now, the thing is, we don't have to do that. That's an idea. Like, that's an idea that school of thought inherited from somewhere, but it doesn't need to be like that. There's no prerequisite to be
But
here.
that's the thing, isn't it, Omkara? We have in media, in movies, or in our culture, we believe it's like you just said, and I love this, and this is what I try to do in my book as well, is demystify this whole thing. Consciousness, I use the word presence or states, like just be present and find out what that's like. Keep playing with that. And it's not, I mean, I know from having been like I'm recovering from the addiction to spiritual seeking, right? Like I wanted it really complex because then it made me feel like I had worth in this world. And I love helping people realize that they're addicted to spiritual seeking and complex concepts, and that they have, if they sit still long enough, they recognize like, oh, I don't have to do all of that. I don't have to wait 7 generations and maybe then, or I might as well just whatever right now, because it's only just for, you know, the real masters that have already come and gone, basically. And what a shame, because we have that addiction to complexity. And again, I think it goes back to the way that we've been rewarded for thinking really complexly. And also because we've been conditioned that if it's got to be hard, you know, we should want things that aren't easily accessible to us. They're more expensive, they're further away, they're only for the rich or the famous or the elite. Or I have to go sit somewhere, and you and I have taken ourselves out of society a couple of times and gone through, you know, trainings and things, but that's not necessarily the way that everybody has to do it. And so I love that you said, I like to demystify this whole thing and simplify it, because that isn't it? It's such a huge, that whole package is such a huge piece of why people don't believe that they can. Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, it's sometimes tricky, since we've been in this business for so long, that we think that everyone gets this, right? It's not hard. It was never meant to be hard. It's not by design, so that you have to do all these things in order to experience peace now, or just be present now. But I do think that a big portion of the world believe it's hard, if not impossible. Like you mentioned, like, why bother? Like, the Pope is in communion with God. He can, you know, talk for me. Kind of thing. And the other thing is, Yeah, I think it does seem, again, it's kind of hard to gauge since we've been doing this for a long time, and a lot of our communication is with colleagues and all that stuff. But um, it's an important message for sure. And it's and even within, you know, any spiritual direction, like it seems to me, and I'm not talking exclusively about our, like the Ishayas, but all the teachers that I kind of check in on once in a while, like on YouTube or see a video of this or that, like resonates with me. Every one of them says the same thing. It's simple, it's simple, it's simpler, it's simpler, it gets simpler, it's more easy, you know, just stop avoiding it. It's here, stop looking there, you know, that kind of thing. And the other part of that, which I want to mention, is that when you kind of, because it can be easy to kind of get what you need to do. For example, I talked about letting go. If you can let everything go just now and see what's there. And typically, if you do that, there is more peace than the moment before, or there is more joy, or, you know, whatever, one of these positive things. But more than anything else, it's a sense of stillness, like that everything is still. Even that thing can turn into concept. Basically, the concept, just let go. And so you think, okay, I just need to let go. And then you have a thought, right? Or think about something, and you start whipping yourself or punishing yourself for not being good enough at letting go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the real, the
Have you
real.
ever done that, Omkara?
I have. uh, and I think everyone goes through that. Like you see, oh, okay, I don't need to do that. And that's the true value of a teacher. Basically, let it go. It's simpler, but not as a concept, but as a direct kind of recognition. So yeah, it's again, it comes back to, you gotta play with it. And then if you hit stuff like bumps or have issues, you need to express it, talk to someone, and not try to think your way through it. It can, yeah. My main message for that is it's okay if you stumble and fall. You know, who cares? And this is like one of those, really, who cares? And if you find the answer to that, you'll probably laugh, you know?
Yes. I agree. That's been my experience. Who cares? And I say that a lot. And yes, that's a good one. Kara, we're getting close to the hour mark, and I had another question. I wanted to see if you had anything for this, and then we'll close up after this set piece. But um, something that's come for me, and you used this word earlier. You said the art of learning, I think, was the book
Mhm.
that you'd read. So our teacher's teacher wrote a book called The Art of Ascension. I think it was called that.
Yeah, something.
I'm never certain about some things, most things. But anyway, it's become really clear to me that, like you were just talking about, the kind of like the journey that we go through as we start to sit still long enough, we see the stuff, we see whatever. And left to our own, the natural tendency that we have is to beat ourselves up
Mhm.
instead of like the perfectionist, the control freak, the whatever. And how valuable it's been to have somebody say that totally trust, knows what they're talking about, that allows you to feel safe enough and trust enough to keep going.
Mm.
So for me, those forgettings are so clear that it's this habit. It's not anything that's personal at all and never has been. And stuff that comes up, we'll have to talk about this some other time, but sometimes I just see it's collective consciousness or ancestry stuff, DNA stuff. Like, it's fascinating. It's so fascinating. So it's all become like this ascension path, this rise to full human consciousness, this return to the present moment really is like an art. It's presented itself like an art for me. And being, maybe not even just because you're a musician, but I wonder if you experience it similarly. If you see it like that level, for me it's grace. And if you experience it like that at all, this path that we're on as an art form.
Yes. But again, it's more than anything. You mentioned it. It seems to be grace more than anything. The only thing required by anyone is basically the willingness to keep going. And you mentioned that too, you know, having the trust to just, okay, I'm gonna step outside this cliff now and see what happens. But it's yeah. Yeah, I don't.
That's beautiful. I mean, as you were sharing that, I was like, yeah, I mean, my experience of it, I can say like, like as if I can get what Sadashiva meant by calling it the art of ascension. But even that, like as you're sharing again, the simplicity of what happened, what is grace? When I stop, all of a sudden everything is grace. And a capacity that I have in any given moment to be completely dissolved and surrendered to grace. It, go ahead.
Yeah, it just came up like, and again, like this grace word is have some connotations to it usually, and usually you think of grace and it's like this serene, beautiful, flowing kind of stuff. But grace has a different face too. Grace can be very fierce, but it's grace nonetheless. Like one of the reasons I started searching, if you will, before I even knew about Ascension, was an episode where I was totally kicked my ass, right? And it was horrible. But without that, I wouldn't sit here now. You know, it kind of, it's the event that started this whole whole thing. And that too was grace, even though it didn't feel very flowing or comfortable or any of the good stuff. But I've always liked that fierce grace. It did, you know, it's the part of, you know, that Sadashiva, you mentioned at MSI. Sadashiva is the part of God that works towards freeing humanity. And that Sadashiva also has a fierce side, right? And that's the part where it kind of, okay, so, okay, I guess we'll have to drag you kicking and screaming into freedom, right? and yeah, so grace isn't kind of this fluffy thing necessarily, even though sometimes it very much is. but sometimes it's quite fierce. But it's all the, and I don't mean to imply that you need to experience bad stuff in order to get anywhere. That's not what I'm saying at all. But sometimes it's not as fluffy, sweet bunny rabbit kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't get here from fluffy bunny rabbits.
Turns out a lot of people don't. Like, they needed some kind of kick in the butt.
It's a wonderful flip when and maybe this is, I'm sure this is still growing in me, but like when the label of this is good or bad or whatever starts to not be attractive, and you're like, this is just life. Oh, okay, it's intense right now. Like, I call it the Shakti dial. The Shakti dial, the power of God, like, gets turned up. And sometimes that happens when I'm going to do something like this, or I'm with our teacher, or who knows what. Or my teenagers, going through some stuff, or we're going through some stuff. The Shakti dial is turned up. And that's not a concept that I like just have to talk to myself about. It's like it's an experience that's come in, like, through over practicing, just allowing, like you said, well, you said let go, but like just allowing everything to be as it is. And of course you see the old habit of the judgment or the whatever come up initially, but over time you just give more importance, more attention, more priority to stillness, to presence. And it's not as comfortable or as enjoyable to put a label on it, Can you speak about that?
Yeah, I think you said it quite succinctly. What is that word? You put a good sentence to it, and it's that it doesn't, good or bad doesn't kind of, why bother with labeling it, kind of thing, kind of feeling. It's just what it is. And it does seem like if you give yourself the time and opportunity to practice, to recognize what is, underneath or above or whatever you want to say, all of it, like the stillness that's always present. If you allow yourself to rest more and more in that, all of this is automatic, right? It's not that you don't do it. Every now and then, like, you forget, and you get into story or like, this is shit, and before you know it, you're way into the future or something. It's not that. It's just that it loses its importance. It's like more and more, you see it and let it go, and it kind of fades into the background. And again, it's kind of like, you don't have to do anything to kind of achieve it. You just have to allow, or as you said, or let go. And in that, if you rest there, and it's basically resisting the temptation to pick stuff up, right? Because you can be in a state right now, anyone who's listening to this, and you can just stay there. And there's nothing to let go because you're not holding anything. And then just see whatever comes, let it come, and let it go. That's kind of like all there is to it, really. But for most people, it takes a little bit of practice, kind of honing that attention muscle, or letting go muscle, or allowing muscle, or whatever you want to call it. And from there, like, that is in its essence supremely simple. And what it seems like is from there it gets simpler. And then we forget. And so what? And we have each other to remind us. We have life to remind us. Put my finger in the socket. Okay, okay. And you mentioned it before. It's a return. It's never whipping yourself because you left. It's just a gentle return, and then you're back to resting here. And what's here? That's kind of like the, the big game in town. What's here now? And again, it's one of those things, right? That what we call normal life doesn't stop. There's no, a true spiritual practice doesn't exclude anything. It's just a way of letting you become present now. So letting life happen, basically, it doesn't exclude any part of life. If you start excluding any part of life, because it's basically because you have an opinion about it. And I kind of, we're on overtime now, but that's a whole other subject. Basically, don't take any spiritual concepts as true value, right? Experience, like, use, if you have a spiritual practice, use it when you remember, and see what that brings you, right? And if you if any of you listening to this think actually do that, and you kind of, oh, that's bullshit, I have, that's not my experience, then then tell us, talk about it. That's and I think you definitely agree strongly on this one, is that anything we say, don't take our word for it.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, but the invitation is there, right? The invitation is, be willing to see what is here now without any idea of how that's going to be. And it does seem to require a little bit of, sometimes a lot of guidance, Left to our own devices, we tend to start thinking about it.
Yes, definitely my experience.
And that doesn't seem to be, like, no matter how advanced in a spiritual practice you are, it doesn't seem to, you're not immune in that sense. So that's why I love stuff like this, right? What you do here is, like, we get to talk about it, share it, and remind each other. And hopefully people who listen to this, maybe it sparks something in them,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your willingness to share so much today with us. And I just want to say, if anybody out there doesn't have a practice, and for Omkara and I, we've both been practicing the Bright Path Ishaya's Ascension for 20 some years. And I've never found anything personally that has given me such a clear experience of the present moment, or been so efficient and effective with eyes closed or open. And it is used with both. So you can check the offerings out. Of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic as this is being recorded, but there are possibilities for learning that practice in some places right now, and eventually everywhere again. You can look up thebrightpath.com and just check out our schedule, or contact Omkara or myself, and we can guide you in the right direction. Omkara, where could people find you at? Facebook, or?
They can, and my email address is omkara@brightpath.com. So if you remember my Sanskrit name, Omkara, then you know my email address.
Yeah, and take Omkara up on the invitation. If you got moved either in a desire for more, or irritated because something that was shared isn't your experience, feel free to express that to either of us or both of us, and connect with us and let us know what how we can serve or just listen, and we'd welcome that. I will post wherever this video is posted, which will be YouTube and social media and my website. I will post ways to connect with us as well as the Bright Path website. So anything final that you have to share, Omkara, before we say adieu?
No, just be gentle with yourself no matter what you're doing.
That's a beautiful invitation, especially right now. And I think a lot of people are very stressed out by the big changes with this coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic happening. And I think that's a beautiful invitation any day, but especially right now.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your evening and talk to you soon.
Thank you.